Hello, I'm Peter Orker from Peter Orker Piano Tuition, and it's time for another A to Z of piano composers and pianists. Well, today's A to Z is letter S, and there are actually quite a lot of composers and pianists to choose from. But the one I've chosen I'll tell you about in just a moment. But just indulge me for a minute, because pianists sometimes talk about their teachers and there's kind of arisen the concept of teachers, grand teachers, great grand teachers, and so on, etc. As each generation of teacher passes their wisdom on to the next generation of student. Pianist Stephen Huff has written that he thinks this is a lot of nonsense, but it seems something that stuck, and it also seems peculiar to pianists, and I thought I'd indulge in a little bit of generational great grand teacherism. So anyway, if there is anything in this, I can trace my teaching provenance, if you like to call it that, back to today's letter S composer. And this is how I did it. My piano professor at the London College of Music was David Campbell. This is the late 1970s. He was a wonderful chap, actually. I learnt a lot from him, and he was an amazing pianist. I've never kind of met anyone quite like him. He could play anything by Chopin, Bach, Beethoven or Prokofiev. These were his mainly, his favourite composers, and had everything in his head. He could just name a piece by Chopin, he could play it, even the really difficult ones. It was awesome to witness. And he could, and perhaps should, have been a major recitalist. He certainly had the ability, but chose instead to devote his professional life to teaching at the college. He was sometimes confused with the clarinetist David Campbell, who was working around the same sort of era, and caused people to sometimes say to me, "Why are you studying piano with a clarinet player?" Well, my David Campbell teacher was definitely a pianist. When I first met David in 1977, I was expecting an old man, perhaps in a tweed suit, maybe balding, smoking a pipe, that sort of character. And I remember well my very first lesson, knocking on the door, and him saying, "Come in," and in I went. And there was this young man sitting there at the piano. I guess he was early 30s at the time, dressed trendily, if indeed 1970s fashion could ever be called trendy. And he himself had studied at the college with his professor, and he was still there. His name was Eric Hope. And Eric Hope was a pianist who was actually very well known at the time. No one really talks about him anymore, but at that time he was a very well known pianist on the concert platform, especially during the immediately post-war years, 50s, 60s, but he was still performing right up towards the end of his life in 1999. I didn't know Eric very well, but I enjoyed attending his lectures on piano pedagogy at the college. So in a sense, Eric was my grand teacher, if David was my teacher. Well, Eric Hope studied piano with Kathleen Arnold, so that makes her my great grand teacher. Not a lot is known about Kathleen, other than the fact she was a pupil of Fanny Davies, my great great grand teacher. Well, Guernsey-born Fanny was a major concert pianist in the early 20th century, with a solid classical repertoire of Brahms, Schumann, Beethoven and so on. But she mainly gained, or gained a very, very high reputation for pioneering works by what were then modern composers from the early 20th century, composers like Debussy and Scriabin. They were composers which many pianists, and I'll also say audiences, rather shied away from. Well, with Fanny Davis's teacher, we finally reach our letter S composer, Clara Schumann. My great, great, great grand teacher. Unless, like Stephen Huff, you think it's a load of baloney. But I'm not so sure. Well, Clara was born Clara Wieck in 1819 and married the composer Robert Schumann, bearing him 8 children. How she found time to follow a piano playing, composing and teaching career beats me. And she taught at the Conservatoire in Frankfurt, the only woman on the faculty. Music was very sexist in those days, so you had to have a serious talent if you were a woman to get anywhere. She died in 1896 following a stroke. Clara Schumann wrote some delightful music, but it always had a depth and artistic sort of integrity about it that elevated it above mere prettiness. And I'm going to illustrate that now. Here's a little scherzo in G major that she wrote. If you know your musical terms, you might know that scherzo means joke. Certainly some of Beethoven's scherzos are quite light-hearted, and for Beethoven even jolly, although there's often a sort of tinge of sarcasm amongst the jollity. Chopin's scherzos, on the other hand, are very serious works which don't contain much jokiness or humour about them at all. If anything, they're more sort of angry than light-hearted. Well, in Clara Schumann's scherzo, things do indeed, they start off playfully, sort of like this. Which is what you might expect from a scherzo. But after the sunny, happy joyfulness, things take a more serious turn. Going into a minor key darkens things straight away. And as the middle section continues, it even becomes quite sinister. It's as if dark clouds have suddenly appeared in our sunny day to spoil the fun. And there are some chromatic scales going on in here as well, as it gets even more sinister. Listen to that chord. Well, finally, after the darkness, the sun shines out again, and the piece ends with some optimism and happiness. Back in the major key, and a repeat of the music from the beginning of the scherzo. Well, I'm going to play the whole scherzo for you now, so you'll be able to hear all that moving from happiness to darkness, back to happiness again. and thank you very much for watching today. I hope you'll give me a like and a share, and do look out for the next A to Z of piano composers and pianists. Bye for now.